All right, so we were enjoying our break, and today our wonderful Pythonistic quote of the Zen of Python. We have 3 lines to accommodate with today. Readability counts, right? I mean, we've just looked at the different ways that you can use the format a string. That definitely helps with readability, right? So you could use concatenation, adding that plus sign in there. You could use interpolation, or you could use the format method. So those are the 3 ways. But again, understand that special cases are not special enough to break the rules. So to keep that in mind, but make sure you understand also that practicality beats purity. All right, that's it. Let's carry on. The next thing we have to talk about is file basics. So back when we started, we talked about a little bit about hardware architecture, how the computer is broken up. We have inputs and outputs. And we also have hardware and software. Everything we're doing, we're building it on the hardware. We have external hardware and we have internal hardware. So the internal hardware is where our program resides, specifically in the memory. So we went ahead and talked about conditionals, loops, and functions. All that computation takes place in the CPU, right? So all the computation that we talked about when we talked about conditional loops and functions takes place right here in the CPU. And everything that we've been saving has been saved in our main memory. So the variables, the data structures, those lists, and dictionaries all reside here in the main memory. So we're not able to keep track of it because this main memory is volatile. Once you turn off the power, it goes off, right? The CPU is just there sitting and waiting for instructions. What next do I need to do? So now we're introducing a method of making our code, instead of being transient, it's now being persistent by using the secondary memory. It's also useful because when the power goes off, it's still available. If you need to run your code on another device, you can take it out. If you're using a flash drive or external drive, you can remove that and run it on another device, and so on and so forth. So it's also useful for both input and output. You can use your file as an input, save it in a list, save it in a variable, save it in a dictionary. You can also use it as an output. So once you output it to that file and save it in your secondary memory, you can come back tomorrow and you can still see the output from your last file. So think about video games. If you're having video games or just a guessing game, you can save it and then okay, this user has this highest points, or that user has these highest points, or these are some of the cities that you've guessed. We probably want to remove them from the dictionary the next time you're using, and so on. So all of those, keeping track of your records, high scores, and so on and so forth. All right. But again, different file types we talk about. They're text files, which we've been using all along. Everything we can see, most of it is text. Even though it's text, it also gets converted to ones and zeros before it gets saved in our secondary or main memory. Binary files would be things like audio files, text, pictures, videos. Those, you cannot open them in a text editor. If you open them in a text editor, you're going to see gibberish, right? Because the text editor cannot encode that. So, or decode that, I should say. So those are the 2 main things. We'll be working mostly with the text editors, the text files. So the text files, as you can see here, there are a bunch of text files. A file normally, again, I know it defeats the purpose to mention it, but file usually has a file name and an extension, okay? So we also have the file path, where the file is coming from, where it's located. But then the file path, in addition to the file's unique name and its actual extension, it combines to give you what is known as the file path or the file name, okay? So that has to be unique each time. So you can have the same name, but in a different folder. That's totally fine because it has a different path. So naming conventions, again, in the past when we had issues with space, the naming convention was limited to just 3 characters for the decimal. So those 3 characters plus the period makes it 4 characters that we're able to save for just the file extensions. But now, space is not an issue. So you see things like YAML. Before, HTML was always saved as HTM because, again, it had to be limited to that. So that's why if you see those separate differences, that's an explanation for that. So text files, again, everybody's familiar with those. It's simple. We can read them in whatever text editor. CSV file stands for comma-separated values. We also have tabs. It's not necessarily commas. It could be commas. It could be tabs. It could be semicolons. It could have any delimiter that you need. XML is mostly used for the web, transfer information from, say, HTTP protocol. And it also goes hand in hand with hypertext markup language. So HTML just has a hierarchical structure. So you can say, okay, these are the universities. Each university has its departments. The departments have their courses. The courses have their teachers, and so on and so forth. So that is what the structure of XML is. JSON is more modern compared to XML. XML is old school, even though some people still use it. I think it's really mostly used in the IRS, in the Internal Revenue Department, IRS department. I'm not sure if they still use it, but I know a few years ago they were still using it. But JSON is more modern. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Remember, we keep saying, Python, everything about Python is objects. Tomorrow, definitely, we'll talk about object-oriented programming. So in this case, we are just going to annotate everything in an object manner. So for instance, a student or a person will have different attributes, and then you have your attributes. Say, for instance, if you're a person, you should have a name, and then the name gets inputted in there. But the JSON is pretty much just a dictionary. So the name would be your key, and your actual name will be the value. Your date of birth will be a key. Your date of birth will be the value. Your nationality will be a key, and the nationality obviously value. So that's why it's a dictionary format, and a dictionary can hold many data types, even the data structures. So you can have a nested dictionary, and there are ways that you can actually make it look pretty. We'll look at that shortly. YAML is also very similar. It stands for YAML, another markup language, just like XML, but it's more representative like JSON. It's more verbose. Okay, JSON is more abbreviated. YAML is the same thing with JSON. So if you know JSON, you're typically easy to read YAML, which is why it's more verbose, but it's easy to read. Well, that said, at the end of the day, when we said earlier that a line or a string is a sequence of characters, it's in the same light that will say a file is a sequence of lines. So we can always save each line to be in a particular item and also have an index for it, and so on and so forth. So we're going to look at how we can make that happen. Okay, so what questions do you have for this part so far? Everything clear? Ties in with everything we've done so far?
Yeah, just when we look at the types there,
yeah,
we don't have Excel.
Excel.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very, very good question. So Excel is actually, let me break it down this way. So we have different companies, right, that are in IT. And those different companies could either be creating hardware or software. So Microsoft is one of the biggest ones. Microsoft creates Windows. So they've got into the software space. Dell is another one, but Dell does hardware stuff. So Dell is not going to be something that we'll talk about. But Microsoft creates Windows. Windows is an operating system. It's rivaled by Mac operating system, which is Mac OS, created by Apple. Apple does not create, or Apple did not create many enterprise applications, but Microsoft created enterprise applications to go with its Windows operating system. So in there you have Office. Office applications are very popular, and one of the Office applications is Excel. So Excel is used for calculations, computations, but normally the extension for Excel files is usually XLS. Okay, there can be other variations like a T at the end for a template, and M at the end for a macro-driven XML file. But when you want to get a file from Excel to be in a text format, as we've talked about here, what you need to do is convert it to CSV. Why you need to do that is because Excel has multiple sheets, multiple tabs.
Yes.
So you won't be able to get that entire workbook, as it's called. The workbook, again, is just like a textbook, a book that has multiple pages. So all you're interested in is one single page. So that one single page is what's going to be saved as a CSV file. And then you can use that to import into your Python code. Does that help?
It does. So yeah, not that I tried Excel before. I just wanted to make sure that it's not part of the type.
Yeah, you can use Excel files, definitely. And if you want to try it, all you have to do is make sure you identify the tab, the sheet that you want to get your data from.
Yeah.
You go ahead and save it. You click Save As. You specify that I want to save it as CSV file. You can also save an Excel file as a text file. You just have to specify your delimiter and so on and so forth.
Good, thank you.
You're very welcome. Very good question. Okay, so let's check out the next thing. Now, let's get into files per se. So that file in there is sitting in our secondary memory. We want to be able to pull it. What we need is a handle, right? So think about the suitcase. All your documents are in a suitcase. In order for you to open the suitcase, you need to get to the handle. So that handle is what we're going to use to be able to operate with everything within our file. So everything gets pulled out from the memory location. It sits in the handle. That's what we use to interact. As we said again, a few things you can do is you can open the file. Okay. When you open the file, you definitely need to specify the mode in which you want to open the file. How do you want to access this file? Do you only want to read the information? Then that's fine. Just use R. And we'll look at an example of that. Do you want to read it and do other stuff? Maybe write it, then do R+. Do you want to just write information to the file, insert or add? Then go ahead and do write. But writing, very careful with it because it's going to overwrite your entire file. So if you have 3 lines of content in there and you decide that you're going to write 1 line, it's going to delete all 3 and write 1 on top of it. Okay, so that's why it's very careful to use. But if you want to write and do other stuff, then go ahead and use the W+. If you don't want to overwrite your file, then you need to use A because it's just going to append to the end. So you already have 10 records. You probably want to add 2 more. What you want to do is use the A access mode when you open the file, and then you can go ahead and add your 2 more at the end. Especially if you're iterating through, if you're looping to, say you have a list and you want to take that list and output it to a file. You have to iterate through that list and then append each time. So instead of overwriting, you end up with 1 item rather than having the entire list. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Excellent. And appending, when you're appending, you need to have the file available. If you're writing, if the file is not in existence, it's going to create one for you. So there are also a bunch of methods that we can talk about. But in a nutshell, that's what it takes for you to open a file. It's a good idea to always close your file after you're done with it. That way you don't have memory sitting out there and taking up resources. Python is going to close it for you, but it's a good idea to always be cleaning up your space after yourself, and so on and so forth. So we did talk about errors encountering errors and handling errors gracefully a few weeks ago. It's the same thing with file operations. In some cases, you might try to open a file and the file is not there. Or you might try to open the file's name is not inputted correctly, or the path is wrong. You're going to end up with an error. So remember, we had the try except clause. We'll use those try except clauses to be able to handle our error, to tell us, sorry, this file is not there. You probably need to go check it out, and so on and so forth. In other cases, the file might be there, everything is okay, but you don't have access to it. So if you don't have access to it, it's also going to give you an error message. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there isn't much else to talk about with files. You just have to practice and practice, and know that, hey, if you want your users to be able to have fun with your application, maybe save their progress or save their high scores, or maybe export some data or import data from the internet or anywhere else, then you definitely need to look at file operations. Sounds good? So again, one thing that I did not add in here, which is very important, is normally you need input and output. The input could be coming from the user manually, as we've been doing, using that input function. We could also get our input now from files, right? Another place that you can get input from is an API, okay? API stands for Application Programming Interface. So there's a bunch of data out there, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, Google Maps, all of those applications, all of those software, all of those programs, they produce data and they set it up in a way that anyone can have access to it. So if you create your own application, which is what we've been doing all along, we can create our application to access the application programming interface. Those two applications get to talk to each other using the API. So you can access that to the API and pull the information. What usually happens is most of them set up their data to be available in JSON format. Okay. So when it's available in JSON format, that's why it's important to understand the structure of a dictionary and how nested dictionaries work. And then you can navigate to the JSON format to be able to get that information. Sounds good?
Yep.
Excellent. So let's jump into some practice.